Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather on this Thanksgiving Eve. Thanks for joining us tonight for your latest weather information around the state. And as always, if we're not on at your part of the day, you can always call the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. But don't forget, you can find us on YouTube, youtube.com/AKwx TV, Alaska Weather TV for short. You can also find the link on our Weather Service webpage there. Just look for the TV link on the bottom of the page. But if you subscribe to us on YouTube, when the post is made on YouTube, about an hour or so after this is on TV, you can get an alert on your phone or mobile device or even in your email on your computer that says, hey, Alaska Weather's ready to watch. And then you can watch the whole thing, or you can just watch the marine section. You can watch the front where we talk about the weather warnings. Or you can skip to the middle and watch the aviation section, whatever you like to do, and we're just happy you watch. As always, you can check out the website. The website has all of our official information, weather.gov/Alaska. If you can't find what you're looking for, let me know. I'm happy to serve you any way I can. david.snider@noaa.gov is the easiest way to find me online, and I usually get back to you just as quickly as I can. Thanks to everyone I've talked to in the last day or so as well. Let's get right to it. A volcanic ash advisory has been posted for parts of the Alaska Peninsula, specifically around Perryville there, and simply because Dehne has been erupting with some ash. And as a north wind blows in, it looks like that could bend some of that ash fall closer to the Perryville area as we go through the evening and overnight hours. Take a look at this FAA webcam picture that I caught today. Our friends over at the FAA are really good about sharing these cameras, and of course all of our aviators and weather friends around Alaska know these cameras well. But here's the one looking to the, I believe it's the northeast, and you can see the ash plume coming off of I practiced saying this all day. Dehne, there you go. You can see that moving away, and in just in the last couple frames, watch what happens. It wouldn't be surprising to see this just dramatically stop, and there it goes. So we may see it on and off throughout the rest of the next 24 hours. Not really sure. I'm not a volcanologist, but our friends at the Alaska Volcanic Observatory certainly are volcanologists and experts there. And they were saying earlier today that this is one of the more unusual eruptions for Dehne. So it's very possible that this could continue for a while. But if it takes a break, as we saw in the last couple frames there, maybe that shouldn't be such a surprising thing either there. So interesting. But either way, when we associate this with the weather, then we start to be a little bit more concerned about what it's doing. And we want to pay special attention to where that ash is going. And in this case, around the Perryville area, which again, right about here. Here's what we saw earlier today when we ran the weather models with the Alaska Volcanic Observatory. You can see that ashfall drift, generally light amounts, and we're only talking about maybe a millimeter or so if that actually makes it into the Perryville area, because look, we're talking about that very purple or blue square there. So, you know, trace amounts of ash. However, it's volcanic ash, so you know, not the kind of stuff that you want getting in your electronics and stuff. So you know the drill in Perryville. You know the volcano has been fairly active for quite a while. This would be the time to at least be prepared if ash falls in the community there. But right now it doesn't look like any large amounts of ash are in the offing as of the latest information from this afternoon from the Alaska Volcano Observatory. And from the latest weather observations that we have in the area that would bring that north wind into the region. So again, this is the latest model there from the AVO, and again, Dehne has been erupting with ash. So keep tabs on that. Make sure you find us on the website there. And one more place to subscribe to. It's not a National Weather Service site, but Twitter. Type in Twitter and go to Alaska_AVO. And subscribe to their updates. It's the best thing since sliced bread, and I highly recommend that, especially if you live in the shadow of a volcano, as many of you do in the Alaska Peninsula and westward. Here's a look at satellite picture here. You're not going to see a whole lot from Dehne on this view, but If you've heard us talk about any of the new satellite technology lately, GOES 17, GOES S is what we've referenced there. Sometimes you'll see the educational segments in the middle of the show. It is paying off in big time bucks with watching the volcano this afternoon. So hopefully we'll get some of those pictures there and have some folks talking to you about what we've seen just today. It's pretty amazing stuff. As we look at low pressure moving across the eastern Gulf, you can see there's a lot of dry air across southeast. That's going to bring improving conditions, I think, as we get into Friday, maybe into Saturday for parts of southeast, but we're also watching a fairly decent storm coming up out of the North Pacific that's only deepening as it's moving from west to east. That's going to stir up the winds across the chain for the next couple days and then eventually take over the Gulf in a big way. But in the meantime, generally tame conditions for the interior, fairly dry air, a lot of wind moving across the North Slope. You can see one of those waves working across AKwx toward the Chukchi coast, and that's all happening on the north side of that stationary boundary there. High pressure sitting right in the interior. Levels above about 1,000 millibars there. Trough moving across the central and eastern Gulf, and some pockets of snow showers across the western areas of Alaska. But here's the larger system at 963 millibars. It's going to sit across the central chain tonight and into tomorrow. Trough sits out across the north and eastern Gulf, and it's going to keep a lot of that moisture just out of reach of most of southeast. North of the Alaska Range, some areas of light snow there. Fog certainly possible around the Glen Highway and down through the Cook Inlet region as we get through tonight. Southwest, you're looking at some snow showers, areas of fog across the Yukon Delta, and then pockets of blowing snow again across the north. Now the trick is, it doesn't look like there's going to be any substantial amounts of snow, nor are we going to see any great amount of wind. So the combination of not a lot of snow and not a lot of wind, there's still going to be some blowing snow there, but probably not in any way that's going to result in a weather warning for you at this point. So as we look at Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, of course, southeast should see improving sky conditions, so maybe a little more sunshine if you're ready for that. And the same goes for southwestern Alaska. This area here is under a ridge of high pressure, though weak and small. It's still a ridge, and it's still trying to break up the clouds. So perhaps some improving sky conditions for you there. Out west, you can see what's coming, though. Low pressure is dropping into the lower 970 range, south of Adak and Atka, and south and east of Shemya and south of Kiska. The front's going to hang right over the Aleutians, so all of this is trying to work its way eastward, and by Friday, you can see it's positioning itself a little bit better in the southern part of the Gulf, and that is going to gradually push that ridge eastward. This was what was over southwestern Alaska on Thursday, so now that drier air is moving east. That more stable region is found across the Gulf and the eastern Gulf at that. So we're getting rid of this. We're pushing another low into southeastern Alaska that might generate some areas of clouds and perhaps a few showers, mainly in the south and higher terrain snow, but still not a bad day for southeast. The interior still looks pretty quiet, though a few more clouds have spread eastward at this point. Might be a pocket or two of snow showers along the Yukon Valley and northward. And that heavier wind, if there is going to be any heavy wind, is pushing toward the Bering Strait communities, Seward Peninsula down toward St. Lawrence Island, and even further south, you get into a rain and snow mix around St. Paul and St. George. So the main part of the storm now will be out over the Aleutians, and it's stretching out into the western and southern parts of the Gulf. This sets us up for Saturday and Sunday for most of this low in the upper levels and at the surface to be really centered up right here across the Gulf, and that puts more of south central and more of southeast into prime position again for more of a southerly wind, and eventually more clouds and more moisture and more warmth spreading into the interior and again the west coast. So this looks like we're moving in a pretty unsettled pattern here as we move into the holiday weekend, and this could take us well into Monday as well. It looks like a fairly resolute storm system going into your Thanksgiving weekend. Let's take a look at temperatures here as we go into Thursday morning. Mid to upper 30s for most of southeast, south central in the 20s, Kodiak about 26. As we get into King Salmon and Dillingham, it's certainly going to be cooler. Single digits to mid-teens for many areas there. 25 around Macoriac and Nunivak Island, 25 for St. Lawrence Island. Looks like Ambler could drop down to about 9, 0 in Fort Yukon, 6 below for Arctic Village, and single digits to even sub-zero readings across the North Slope. Utqiagvik around 9 below. The western chain anywhere from the upper 30s to low 40s, it looks like, around Perryville, probably close to freezing. High temperatures for Thursday, Thanksgiving Day. You're going to toss the football around like a lot of folks. 30s and 40s across southeast. South central 20s and 30s around Prince William Sound, almost 40 for Cordova and Valdez. Mid-teens for most of the Middle Tanana Valley out toward Eagle. 14 degrees there, 13 in Healy, 8 in Fort Yukon, and warming up a little bit across the North Slope. Temperatures above zero, not above freezing, but 2 above in Utqiagvik and 9 for Wainwright. Teens and 20s for the Kotzebue Sound region and low 20s there around Unalakleet. Overnight lows Friday morning, again 5 to 15 below for most of the North Slope and the upper Tanana and Yukon valleys. Anywhere from 4 above in Fairbanks to southwest in the single digits and low teens, 24 in Kodiak, about 28 in the capital city, and high temperatures on Friday still running cool, 11 in Fairbanks.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Once again, a volcano ashfall advisory is in place until Thursday, 6 o'clock in the morning, and this is mainly for the area around Perryville. Marine weather statements will be issued for areas downwind of Veniaminoff as well. Remember that trace amounts of ash are possible in the Perryville area, so keep that in mind as you're making your aviation plans, which will include areas of at least MVFR along most of the Alaska Peninsula. Now, as you look up northward, IFR conditions are expected to continue generally north and west of the Alaska Range, all the way to the Brooks Range and the areas in the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Marginal conditions expected for most of southeast and the northern Gulf Coast, as well as the Copper River Valley, all of the Bering Sea. And you'll notice as we get into the afternoon, we'll see some improvements across southwest and south central, but marginal conditions are expected for most of the Alaska Peninsula and east toward the chain. Some improvements, really a lot of improvement for southeastern Alaska, with IFR mainly across the middle Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon, all the way up toward the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast for the afternoon. Look for continued improvement as we get into your Friday morning there. IFR conditions are still likely around Adigan and Anaktuvuk Pass and across the upper areas of the Yukon and the upper Tanana through Mentasta Pass, maybe even nudging in on Tanita Pass there. South Central, though, Cook Inlet region, Kenai, all the way out toward Lake Iliamna and the southwestern Capes as well as Bristol Bay should be okay. And even more improvement for southeast as we go through your Friday morning. That continues through the afternoon with VFR there and for a large chunk of southwest. But from the Yukon Delta northward to Norton Sound and all the way up into Kotzebue Sound, look for marginal conditions. Isolated areas of IFR, at least from north and eastern regions from Sandpoint all the way up to, well, let's just about Chignik, let's say, and that will include areas around Perryville again. Look for spotty areas of IFR across Prince William Sound and the eastern interior through your Friday afternoon. Here's your pass conditions now for Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass. We expect to see IFR lasting through your Thursday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will start Thanksgiving Day with marginal conditions, but improvement is expected to continue. Windy Pass starts at IFR with improvement throughout the day. IFR for Isabel Pass in the morning with improvement through Thanksgiving Day afternoon. IFR conditions through Isabel Pass and Mentasta Pass. Tanita Pass looks to be at least marginal through most of the day. Again, Friday you could see some changes there. Portage Pass, we expect to see marginal weather with improvement toward VFR by the afternoon. Chilkoot and White Pass looking to start at IFR, and then from there on out through Friday, we expect to see continued improvement. Freezing levels indicate that we have the levels aloft around 2,000 feet just south of Haines and Skagway, right over Gustavus. South of that, slowly rising to about 4,000 feet. You can see a little bit of a warm nudge there across the central chain, anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 feet, close to Adak and Eka, but most of the state at this point remains below freezing. Icing potential is there. We've got a little more moisture sneaking in from the west, but with that, levels are coming up to about 6,000 to 8,000 feet in the western chain, above 2,000 feet for the central and eastern chain, nudging up towards Sand Point there. Again, all of this isolated moderate. Across to the north, above 1,000 feet there, a little bit more of a widespread and intact area of moisture at the higher levels there, and that descends all the way to about 1,000 feet at least and above. Above 2,000 feet for parts of the upper Tanana Valley and into Prince William Sound and the Copper River Basin. And southeast, kind of hit and miss. Most of that's focused across some of the higher terrain, and then that bends out to sea above 6,000 feet. Our jet stream right now is still concentrated on this upper level trough. This is guiding all of our unsettled weather and keeping things fairly dry and cold across the interior. Not a whole lot of snow blowing through at this time, but you can see a ridge of high pressure right here across the Bering. This is eventually going to break down, and one sign of that is this jet streak here on the south side of the ridge that usually starts to cut this off, and this will allow the focusing mechanism to become the next trough that we see out in the west with stronger northerly flow on the backside, 125 to 150 knots. And again, this is going to take shape and move the overall storm system into the Gulf of Alaska, so that'll be our weekend pattern. Low pressure across southeast and the north. You can see wind speeds are a little bit stronger offshore here for northern southeast into Prince William Sound. Light winds in the interior. And again, our new system developing here across the west with southerlies for the eastern chain in the Alaska Peninsula gearing up to 20 to 35 knots. Stronger winds on the backside there. You can see that at 3,000 feet. Look at the knots, anywhere from about 50 to 60 knots or so on either side of that low pressure system, and more of an offshore flow for south central and southwestern Alaska. Light northeasterlies for most of north and northwestern Alaska for tomorrow. Turbulence, then we're going to be watching the chain below 3,000 feet. Watch for areas of at least considerable moderate, a little bit of chop there across northwestern Alaska as we go through your Thanksgiving day, and some residual thumps and bumps there from Sitka south and east toward Ketchikan and Annette, generally below about 4,000 feet. We'll continue to watch the volcano. Stay with us.
It's a complicated project, but a simple life. You can study whales all over the world, you can study harbor seals all over the world, but you cannot study them in silence all over the world. So we really need this sort of piece of wilderness, this untrammeled wilderness, as they say, in order to answer some of these questions.
So we've been monitoring underwater sound here in Glacier Bay since May of 2000. And the reason why we're doing that is to understand what the park is like from the perspective of a marine mammal, because marine mammals are very dependent on the natural sound environment.
If you sort of bring it back to humans, humans respond to noise in very stereotypical ways, and other mammals do the same thing. So, you know, if you go to a concert with your buddy and the music's really loud, you're going to talk at a higher pitch. You're going to talk louder, and you might have to repeat yourself. And marine mammals do the same thing if it gets noisy. So we're seeing, you know, just which of those three that they actually do. We're here on Strawberry Island for the entire summer.
We sample 8 to 12 hours a day. There'll be 2 people who are on our beach station doing scans, marking each whale in the area, 2 people who are doing focal follows from our tower, which is a temporary tower that we have set up here on Strawberry Island. And then we have 2 people who are in the kayak who are doing fine-scale acoustic sampling for harbor seals. Got a harbor seal at 23 meters.
Got it? What's her bearing?
Bearing is 5822121.
Being able to pair what an animal is saying with where the animal is saying it is an amazing data set. It's a hard data set to get. It takes a lot of work, but it can answer so many questions.
So our cruise ship right here in the background is right on time today. We have a blissful hour and a half before the cruise ship gets here where we can watch our whales in silence, and then our ship comes in, bringing with it the noise that it brings, and we watch our whales while the ship's here to see whether or not their behavior is changing. And then it's going to go up bay and bring passengers to go see the glaciers, and we are going to get that blissful quiet again to see whether or not our whales are going back to that natural behavior.
This is the computer that runs our underwater acoustic monitoring. And there's a 5-mile cable from my office that leads out to a hydrophone that's out recording live sounds in Glacier Bay. And if I turn this up a little bit louder for the moment, that's the sound of a male harbor seal roaring because it's the mating season.
Strawberry Island. Building a good field team and building some good camaraderie is really important. We have sort of these daily routines of things that we do together. So there's a schedule that we check every morning, who's going to cook lunch that day, who's going to cook dinner. And then every day we take a group photo. And then every day we do a daily check-in. We talk about what worked that day, what didn't work that day, and what we learned either from the island or from each other over the course of the day. Surface 900600.
Last night, there were anywhere from 8 to 10 individuals right along the kelp bed off the point. And we were trying to figure out exactly what they were doing. So as acousticians, Michelle and I got a hydrophone.
That seemed like the right thing to do.
Put the hydrophone in the water to see what was going on. Well, we dropped the hydrophone and it was so quiet. There was not a single roar.
Nothing. We heard
It was
nothing.
just so unusual.
One of the things we did observe yesterday was 2 large bull killer whales who had come into the area that we learned today were transient killer whales. They do come into this area to hunt harbor seals. This is a pupping ground. That's what they come in for.
Yep.
We cannot in any way, shape, or form definitively link the presence of mammal-eating killer whales with the silence of harbor seals.
No, but it is quite interesting that they happened at the exact same time. It's always an adventure on Strawberry Island. You never know what the day's gonna bring.
This morning at 5:15 in the morning, the area was just boiling with whales. I had one 15-minute scan this morning where I was literally hopping back and forth on either side of the theodolite, calling out numbers to try and get all the whales as quickly as possible. And then 15 minutes later, we couldn't find them. Aside from getting to be outside all the time, my favorite part of doing my PhD is getting to work with Leanna.
It goes both ways.
It helps when you put 2 minds that think differently onto the same problem.
Global ocean noise is a real problem, and there are areas of the ocean that have underwater sound from vessels so often that you could almost consider it an urban environment. Glacier Bay is a very remote area, and it was set aside as a national park in part to do scientific research. And we're privileged to be able to use it as a natural laboratory where we can better understand the impacts of underwater noise.
There are some places that act like characters in your life, and I think that a lot of Alaskans can resonate with the fact that living here is like having another family member. It's like having somebody really, really important who's sort of nudging you to be a little uncomfortable all the time and to stretch yourself all the time because it's worth it. I've lived here for almost 10 years. I've made Alaska my home, and so I'm an Alaskan by choice.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
On your marine weather now, no big changes across the Beaufort Sea, where we see a pretty substantial ice pack growing there. It's still building to the west, the marginal ice zone expanding outward just a little bit westward of where it was this time yesterday. You can see added growth there in the upper end of Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound, still looking at some higher concentrations of ice. And also across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, there's still marginal ice to be seen, but no substantial changes from what we were talking about yesterday there. However, if you didn't get a chance to look at it, make sure you head over to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice and read the sea ice outlook. That'll take you through the next 3 months, I believe, and give you a better idea about what's to come for the Chukchi and the northern Bering Sea there for all of those living along the west coast. Let's take a look at southeast now. We're going to have a gustier day around the Stevens Passage area for your Thanksgiving. Gusty winds up to about 35 knots or so with 4-foot seas for most of the inside passage with the exception of the Lynn Canal, looking at 30 knots out of the north with a 6-foot sea. Offshore winds are blowing there. The strongest generally is from Port Alexander southward toward Craig and out toward the Dixon entrance. About 12-foot seas expected in that region as well. 25 to 30 knot winds from the east. By Friday, a little bit more of a north and westerly flow. The winds diminish in all areas. The inside passage still a little breezy though. 10 knots around the Clarence Strait, 25 knots up around the Lynn Canal, with a 5-foot sea there on Friday. For South Central, light winds and coming out of the north pretty much for your Thursday. Inside of Prince William Sound, 10 knots, 2-foot seas. Same goes for areas around Kenai down toward the western Barrens. Northwesterlies over the Barren Islands, 25 knots with 7 to 8-foot seas. Some stronger gusts coming out of the Copper River Delta region, up to 35 knots there. 8-foot seas expected in that region there on Thursday. You can see that diminishes on Friday. Otherwise, light winds in all areas, a gentle north and easterly flow for just about the entire region. One exception just outside of Resurrection Bay there with a northwest wind. Easy for me to say, my goodness, 3-foot seas there on Friday. For southwest, easterlies across Bristol Bay, 15 knots with a 5-foot sea. Down the coast, you can see up to 20 knots as you head out toward Cold Bay. Across the northwestern parts of the Pacific, 20 to 25 knots. A little bit of a wraparound flow going on here, all feeding into low pressure that's building out toward the west. Northwesterlies over Kodiak Island, 20 to 25 with 3-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait, higher seas to the east. As we get into Friday, a little bit more of a south and easterly flow is developing as low pressure is moving eastward here. We get that south and easterly flow on the leeward side of the Alaska Peninsula in this case, 30 knots with a 6 to 7 foot sea, 15 knots inside of Shelikof Strait, 20 knots from the south east of Kodiak Island and south of Sand Point and Perryville, 25 knots there with an 11-foot sea for Friday. For the Aleutians, a much different picture as low pressure is building across the North Pacific and just not stalled, but moving very, very slowly eastward, pushing a ridge out of the way. So we're building our winds and our seas, 45 to about 50 knots in all areas. Seas coming up to 19 to 22 feet in the region, anywhere from 35 to 45 knots in the west, 50 knots in the central chain, and 35 to 40 knots in the eastern chain with 9 to as high as 22-foot seas. For Friday, the focus for the stronger winds and higher seas will be out in the west at the wraparound part of the storm. You can see 35 knots and 19 to 21-foot seas. The winds and seas settle down substantially for the central and eastern chain as the bulk of the weather moves to the south and east away from the Aleutians as we get into Friday and Saturday here. So things should quickly improve, but for the central chain into Saturday, you might start watching for some northerly winds to redevelop in the area. As we get across the west coast, 15 to 25 knots, most areas. The Pribilofs up to 30 knots from the east on Thursday with a 7-foot sea. Your Thanksgiving Day, Norton Sound, northerlies 15 knots and 3-foot seas there. As we get into Friday, north and easterly winds are expected to build again as that system is moving to the south and east of you, 25 to 30 knots in most of the region with an 8 to 12-foot sea, the highest of which will be around St. Matthew, St. Paul, and St. George. For the north slope over the ice, north and easterlies 15 to 25. Look for an east and northeast flow through the Chukchi Sea and the coastline. 20 to 30 knots, most of that an offshore wind, but northerlies continue around the northern parts of the Seward Peninsula coastline, including Shishmaref. Watch for a 6-foot sea there out in the outer part of Kotzebue Sound. 11-foot seas on Friday. 25 to 35 knots there over the open water, and 15 to 20 across the Beaufort Seacoast. A quick recap of tonight's weather includes showers along the north and eastern Gulf Coast, some areas of light snow across the Alaska Range, and then some light snow and some blowing snow across the north slope and the Chukchi Coast with a building storm and a deepening storm for the central and eastern chain as we go into Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, and Friday. In the meantime, we are watching the Veniaminoff volcano around Perryville with a light north wind and ashfall advisories in place until 6 o'clock for your Thanksgiving morning there. Winds will become southerly as we go into the weekend. Happy Thanksgiving.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.